seconds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. At the risk of stating the obvious, the assertion of executive privilege has taken this proceeding into a whole new realm. And while Congress has the constitutional right, and this committee, to whom that right is delegated, to require the production of records, the administration similarly has a constitutional right to claim executive privilege and to refuse to produce those records. Now, when you have a conflict between the legislative branch and the executive branch, those conflicts generally will go to the courts to make the decision as to whether or not the administration's claim of executive privilege should be upheld. It would seem to me that before this committee would take any action on the question of contempt, we would first appropriately have to apply to a court to order the production of the records. If then the records were not produced, it would seem that the question of contempt would then be germane. So I just want to ask the Chairman that in the interests of avoiding an untimely collision over an issue of contempt, if the Chairman is prepared to seek a court order for the production of the records prior to having this committee act on the issue of contempt.
If the gentleman is asking, did we go to the court to request a subpoena?
No. Would you, under the, once a President has asserted executive privilege, as he has, are you prepared to challenge that in court, or are you prepared to proceed nevertheless with a contempt citation when that issue has not really been resolved, whether or not he has to produce those records?
If the gentleman would yield. As I announced earlier, we are concurrently evaluating and trying to get from the White House a log of the actual assertion. As you know, the Deputy Attorney General cannot assert executive privilege. Only the President can do it. So a letter saying that the President has done it is not sufficient. To that extent, we are working right now both with House counsel and attempting to work with the White House to get that. But to the gentleman's an answer to his question that probably is most illustrative, Mr. Kucinich, I believe you voted on the Harriet Miers and Bolton contempt. The President Bush had asserted executive privilege. He then continued to assert executive privilege after it was voted successfully out of the House and it went to the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia. So there is a precedent. Every member on that side of the aisle that was here probably voted for that contempt. But having said that, this is not about that vote. We are trying to evaluate where the President might assert executive privilege, if he has asserted it, and we will take note of that. But since it hasn't been asserted before this committee, only a letter arriving from the Deputy Attorney General, that's the reason we're going forward. I will announce, if the gentleman would continue yielding, it is our intent, if the President produces a privilege log of what is not to be produced because categories specifically were part of his deliberative process, it would be my intention to carve that out of contempt so as to send a clean contempt resolution to the floor. We can't do that based on an assertion by the Deputy Attorney General with no specificity, and in light of arguments that have been made, statements that have been made by the Attorney General and the President in the past that they didn't communicate. But we certainly are working on that, and I think the gentleman's point is good. I don't want to repeat a situation in which, if you will, and I think the gentlelady had already said that, in which it arrives at the U.S. Attorney's Office and then is not pursued. That's not our intent. Our intent is to get the documents as appropriate.
Well,
I'd ask the gentleman to have an additional 30 seconds without objection.
As has been stated by individuals on your side of the aisle, you have waited 8 months, I think it is now. You've made your point as far as what the authority of the committee is. The question is whether or not you would be willing to postpone any action on the contempt citation, give the White House the chance to produce the log that you're asking for, and then determine whether or not it would be most appropriate either to apply to a court of jurisdiction that would give you the chance to challenge the White House's position, or then proceed with the contempt. It just seems that there's, given all your patience, that it would be a shame to produce a kind of a titanic contest here between the two branches of government if there's a way to try to make one more effort to avoid it.
I thank the gentleman, and I take note of his comments.